And good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Monks reporting from the Link NKY World Headquarters in downtown Covington. This is the Frankfort Link Live. As always, I'm joined by Link NKY politics and government reporter Mark Payne. Mark, good evening to you. And Mark
Thanks for having me, Michael. Sorry about that. I had to
Mm.
unmute myself, but I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight and speaking with Representative Maddox. And
That's right. Our
Lee
special
Crume as
guest this evening is the Republican State Representative of Dry Ridge, Savannah Maddox. Representative Maddox, so grateful that you could make some time for us this evening.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to join you.
We're going to be talking about some legislation that's important to the representative, as well as broader issues in Frankfort and their impact on Northern Kentucky specifically, and the state more broadly. First, I want you all who are watching to drop us a comment if you have a question, a reaction, and we can relay that either to Mark or to the state representative. And we also want to hear your reaction to receiving the Link Reader. That is our new bi-monthly print publication that is going directly to every household in Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties. Our apologies to Representative Maddox. We may expand to Grant County in the future, but in the meantime, it's just the three northernmost counties. Also, I know a lot of you might have basketball on the mind this evening. Northern Kentucky Norse men and women in action this hour as the postseason is underway. Right now, the NKU women are trailing at the end of the third quarter in the Horizon League quarterfinals. They're playing at Cleveland State right now. Cleveland State, the fourth seed, NKU, the fifth seed. Cleveland State up 44-33 with just one quarter to play. And they are about to tip off in Highland Heights for the men's action, where third-seeded Northern Kentucky is hosting sixth-seeded Detroit. We'll keep you updated throughout the hour as necessary. First, I want to turn to Representative Maddox and just in general, get a reaction from you for how the session has gone from your perspective. This is our first chance to talk this session.
I think that the session has gone very well so far. It's kind of hard to believe that we're already 40 days into the 60-day session. At first, the majority of the energy and momentum centralized around accomplishing redistricting, and then we jumped straight into the budget. And of course, those are pretty complicated tapestries, to say the least. But unlike any other session, it has been kind of a hurry up and wait to a certain extent, as well as we vet issues and try to come up with some good sound public policy.
And we were talking a bit off air before we went live for our viewers. This is almost normal, maybe not in terms of waiting for this or that piece of legislation, but does it look like we're back pretty much, so to speak, after being disrupted for a couple of years?
I feel like we're back, and it couldn't have come a moment too soon for me personally, because at the end of 2020 and pretty much the entirety of 2021, including during the special session, there were restrictions on folks coming down to the Capitol, whether it was the folks who advocate for policy in terms of lobbyists or citizens themselves or the media. It has always been important to me to be able to have that dialogue. And, although we have alternative options like Zoom and are able to correspond in that way, it's just not the same as having a face-to-face discussion about the issues that impact so many Kentuckians.
I'll turn now to Mark Payne, Link NKY politics and government reporter. He is embedded in Frankfort for the duration of the 2022 Kentucky General Assembly session. And Mark, as always, we asked you to reflect on this week, not a week without controversy. What did you see this week?
No, it has been some big things that passed this week, particularly in Northern Kentucky. We're going to talk a little bit about the bridge tonight. And I agree with Representative Maddox too. I have heard around the Capitol that one of the things that people are most excited about is the bringing back of pages on the House and Senate floor. So it sounds like that's exciting. It seems like things are getting back to normal a little bit. But there's also been some movement on gun legislation this week. So of all the things that have gone on with the omnibus abortion bill and the Brent Spence Bridge, there's been some movement on a gun bill that would make Kentucky a Second Amendment sanctuary. The bill passed the House Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Protection Committee on Tuesday. It's been on the orders of the day on the House for Wednesday and Thursday, but it hasn't received any movement or any readings yet. The bill is sponsored by Representative Josh Bray, a Republican. And he says the House Bill 29 is a bill that would designate the state of Kentucky as a Second Amendment sanctuary state. The concept behind the bill isn't anything new. As a matter of fact, there have been 15 states that have enacted similar legislation, including Tennessee and Missouri. Right now, 115 out of 120 counties in Kentucky have something similar as far as a Second Amendment sanctuary goes. And I know Representative Maddox sits on that committee, and she had some interesting comments this week as far as, potentially strengthening the bill because, there has been the bill potentially might not be enforceable, and some of the terminology might be poorly defined. And then, I'll let Representative Maddox speak for herself. But yeah, she is looking to strengthen that bill as much as possible.
Representative
Yes,
Maddox.
and it's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. In previous years, various sponsors have filed a Second Amendment sanctuary bill, including myself. And Representative Bray's bill, House Bill 29, is good. And then I'm glad that there's some momentum around this issue. And it's important not just to myself, but a myriad of Kentuckians across the Commonwealth. I do think that there is room for improvement in so much as this iteration of the bill lacks any type of enforcement mechanism. In other words, it just basically spells out the various provisions within it without having any teeth, as we would say in Frankfort. And I think that we could put some additional language in there to make it a little bit stronger and to more narrowly define some of the terminology. But, one way or the other, I'm just really glad that we are taking a proactive step on Second Amendment legislation. I also have House Bill 123, which is the Firearm Industry Non-Discrimination Act. It actually passed out of the House last year and died in the Senate. So it's been refined a little bit. And I am hopeful that we can get that moving through committee and through the process this year.
What does that mean, gun manufacturer discrimination?
Yes. And the way that House Bill 123 is constructed this year, it would prohibit state government from entering into any contracts with banks that have a policy, an outward policy of discriminating against individuals on the basis of firearm ownership or firearm manufacturing, ammunition manufacturing. Other states are doing this as well. I know Texas has done it. And it gets back to the concept of what types of financial institutions will the state do business with, and under what circumstances.
Are there examples of that being an issue in the Commonwealth?
Originally, whenever I drafted the bill, what I had sought to do was address circumstances that were taking place in terms of folks who owned gun stores that had issues with PayPal and other types of financial institutions where they would refuse to operate or provide services to them based on the fact that it was a firearm selling entity. And I have just now begun to scratch the surface on the concept of ESGs in terms of that scoring and how that can work. And frankly, the impact that can have on financial institutions and other types of corporations.
You have made an issue of the Second Amendment. I think I've seen posts from you on social media that you would like to see Kentucky be, and correct me if I'm phrasing this inaccurately, maybe the most Second Amendment friendly state in the country. What are some examples of the state being unfriendly to gun ownership?
Yeah, I think that a state that is unfriendly to gun ownership would be a state that has restrictions on the types of firearms that you can possess, or the amount of ammunition that you can have, or your ability to carry a concealed weapon without training. In 2019, Kentucky passed constitutional carry. I filed the House version and was fortunate to carry the Senate version to its passage. That was a huge priority. And frankly, it is the most meaningful step forward that we have taken to date since we've taken over the supermajority in terms of making sure that we're protecting and expanding the right to keep and bear arms in the Commonwealth.
I guess what I'm curious about specific to Kentucky, you all do have a supermajority, you all being the Republican Party in both chambers. So a lot of ease passing legislation if the whole party is on board with it. And I guess I've seen Kentucky politicians, particularly of the Republican Party, emphasize their support for gun ownership and expansion of any type of rights that they see as insufficient currently. I'm just wondering what in Kentucky troubles people who have your position, that perhaps gun ownership and the rights to bear arms are threatened in
Sure.
Kentucky.
And I think at this point, a lot of it is playing defense against any type of new gun control proposals. I know that we have had to deal with a red flag law that's been proposed in the Senate, a violation of due process. But as far as being proactive, I also have a bill, and I don't anticipate that it's going to move this session, unfortunately, but that it would abolish gun-free zones. And I think that that's important in so much as I think law-abiding Kentuckians should have the rights to be able to defend themselves from the lawless. But it's something that you continue to build upon.
And I know that Mark Payne, Lincoln KY politics and government reporter, has covered some of Representative Maddox's emphasis on this type of legislation. What are you hearing from other lawmakers, Mark, about these bills?
What's interesting this session is that I don't, if you guys might be familiar with Whitney Austin, she was one of the victims in the third shooting in downtown Cincinnati. She has partnered with Senators Paul Hornback from Shelbyville and a Republican from Shelbyville, and Morgan McGarvey, a Democrat from Louisville, to file some legislation called CAR legislation, crisis aversion and rights retention legislation. And essentially what that would do is allow gun owners that are in crisis, that are having a mental health crisis, to be able to turn their weapons over to law enforcement or a family member or a friend, and then get those weapons back when their mental health crisis is over, or they have received the help that they have been given. Some of on one side of it, folks will say that is a red flag law, but Whitney, when I talked to Whitney, she mentioned that it was a bill that is pro Second Amendment. She's a gun owner. Most folks at her foundation are gun owners, and they want to help folks that are having mental health crisis deal with that safely before getting their guns back.
Representative Savannah Maddox is a Republican from Dry Ridge, the 61st district, which also includes all of Grant County, parts of southern Kenton, and I think a little nibble of Boone and maybe some of Scott as well. And of course, I don't know, am I wrong about that?
Well, it's changed.
I know it's changing, but like right now, you still got a good chunk of southern Kenton and a little piece of Boone.
Currently, I have the whole southern half of Kenton, a little bit of Boone, all of Grant, and northern Scott, but it just changed to where I'll now have a part of Kenton, significant part of southern Boone, and then Grant and Gallatin County. So this is new.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about redistricting and your reaction to that new district as you seek re-election this year coming up momentarily. We'll also talk about the Brent Spence Bridge, since that is of regional concern, and your thoughts on the announcement that was made this week. But before we move off of the topic of guns, I know that's an important issue for you. What are your thoughts to that piece of legislation brought by Senators Hornback and McGarvey?
I think that the key is to make sure that we're never in a situation where we are violating due process. And so much as previous iterations of that legislation have created a scenario where people's firearms can be seized before they've even had their day in court. I also think that it's very important not to commingle or stigmatize any type of mental health issue by creating this scenario where people are perceived as being unstable, because of course, we only want folks to be mindful in their ownership, storage, and usage of firearms and of sound mind. But at the same time, we cannot have a situation where we're passing legislation that would violate due process.
There is a piece of legislation that proposes lowering, is it concealed carry from 21 years old to 18-year-olds being able to participate in the concealed carry option. Is that something that you're sponsoring or co-sponsoring?
I don't anticipate that that will move the session either, because we're getting towards, sine die closer and closer every day. But that said, it's a function of the fact that if you are 18 years old, you are, lawfully able to possess a firearm. And um, we we're in a position of sending folks overseas into war. And I don't see any reason why they should not be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights lawfully. There are a whole host of reasons. I myself, whether it's firearm ownership, whether it's use of tobacco or anything of that nature, am not of the mind of moving the age up to 21, because we did that not too long ago in the legislature based on what happened at the federal level with tobacco. But either 18 is the age of majority, either 18 is adulthood or it isn't. And I just kind of see this incrementalism in public policy. But just a thought.
Representative Maddox, where are you on the proposal to legalize access to cannabis in Kentucky?
I am in favor of medical marijuana. I have co-sponsored that legislation every year since being elected to serve in the General Assembly. I voted in committee, and we had an opportunity to vote it out of the House, but the Senate, they've been a little reluctant to take that measure up.
But not recreational? You don't support recreational access?
I recall you asking me about that back in 2018, as a matter of fact, in Dry Ridge, where I stood on recreational marijuana. And I definitely think that we need to decriminalize, in so much as we've got folks who are incarcerated over crimes that they should not be related to marijuana. But jumping in to legalization of recreational marijuana, that has not been a policy focus of mine. And frankly, I think that that is not something that the legislature, if we can't get medical marijuana passed, I don't think there's a lot of appetite for that.
Well, let's move on to some of the COVID mitigation. You've been one of the more vocal critics of some of the mitigation efforts taken by Governor Andy Beshear over the past couple of years. I don't think there are a lot of remaining mandates that we could even discuss, but I know you've been critical maybe since the beginning of some of the mitigation efforts. And I think you frame this in a way that suggests an imbalance in what is supposed to be the co-equal branches of state government, executive, legislative, where you are, and judicial, of course. And at some point or another, all three of those branches have weighed in on the way that we've dealt with COVID in our federalist system here in the United States. What were your biggest concerns over the past couple of years?
Dating back to March of 2020, I felt like we were seeing a heavy-handed reaction from the executive branch, in so much as the lockdowns and mandates. And we've spoken ad nauseum about shutting down churches, shutting down businesses, and some of the aftermath of our economy and the damage that did. But really, the fundamental issue was an imbalance of power among the three branches, and a lot of that stemmed from KRS 39A. Kentucky was one of only 3 states that had no limitations, no reasonable limitations on emergency power, and also couldn't call itself back into session. I do feel like we rectified that aspect of it, but I still think that we have to be mindful to redefine the appropriate role of government in our lives. And that goes beyond the 3 branches. But, what is the role of government in the context of a public health crisis? What is the role of government outside of the context of a public health crisis? And I think that there has been a reinvigoration for individual liberty and for people paying closer attention to the kind of broad-reaching power that state government has in their lives.
What kind of legislation are we seeing, Mark Payne, related to COVID, either mandates or these types of discrepancies that different elected officials see between the co-equal branches of government?
Yeah, the most recent resolution related to COVID was Senate Joint Resolution 150, which would end the state of emergency in Kentucky. There has also been House Bill 51, which would ban statewide mask mandates. I know that both chambers have talked a lot about local control, and local control is a big subject in both chambers. They believe that local officials should be able to make those decisions. Well, House Bill 51 would essentially ban it statewide. But with the CDC releasing their recent guidelines, it doesn't seem like it's going to end up, getting a vote or end up being a big issue. And then, with Senate Joint Resolution 150, that did pass the Senate. I don't know if it's been discussed in the House yet. Representative Maddox might be able to give me good insight there. I don't believe it's had any movement in the House. I believe it's still in committee. But that would end the state of emergency in Kentucky. And Bashir, opponents have said that would prevent Kentucky from getting federal funding, and Kentucky has received a lot of money from both ARPA funds and CARES Act during the pandemic. But folks on the other side say it's time, it's over. People are tired of it. People want to get back to normal. And I think even for us, Michael, folks that have been diligent in mask wearing and getting vaccines, that I think we might be tired of it too.
There's no doubt about that, being tired of it. And I'll get some reaction from our state representative in just a moment. First, let me remind you, you are watching the Frankfort Link Live, brought to you by Link NKY. You can find our consistent coverage of the ongoing General Assembly session in Frankfort at linknky.com. Our Mark Payne, state government and politics reporter, is in Frankfort for the duration of the session. For the most part, sometimes he's popping around Northern Kentucky as well. So we're always glad to see him in the office too. And I am Michael Monks, reporting from that office in downtown Covington. We're joined today by Republican State Representative Savannah Maddox of the very fine city of Dry Ridge, Kentucky. I want to remind you that you can get your news every day at linknky.com, and that's where you can sign up for our daily email. Wake up in the morning with all of the important news from Northern Kentucky. The daily link will be in your inbox whenever you're ready. We've also got the Kentucky Side, our brand new podcast hosted by me. 3 episodes already up for your listening pleasure. Just go to linknky.com and click on podcasts, and we hope you enjoyed that as well. State Representative Maddox, over the course of the 2 years, I mean, there were inconsistent messages from various levels of government, different policy positions on responding to COVID, maybe determined by the political makeup of who was making those decisions. But even that would be inconsistent. Maybe Democrat governors were doing one thing in one state, another thing in another, same for Republicans. In a lot of ways. Mark Payne referenced that we were masking and received vaccinations. I received the double dose of the vaccine and a booster shot as well. I wore masks where I thought was appropriate. What did you think about the public response and the way that we were left to kind of navigate these murky waters because of how politicized this once in a century health crisis faced our country and the world?
I hope it's once in a century, and I hope that it never transpires again. But that said, you talk about the murky waters, and I think that inconsistent messaging from the very onset, if you go back to the time when we were told early on not to go out and buy masks, and then we were told, yes, you should wear a mask, you should wear a cloth mask. I think that what was missing throughout this process was the public trust. And that's where you started to get some of those early divisions and those rifts that kind of set in and then became politicized. Because, every person, I feel like, when hearing the news, the coronavirus coming over and seeing the images out of China and other parts of Asia of what it was doing at that time, everyone was fearful. So you take that fear in conjunction with inconsistent public policy, and it's going to create some issues. And then, of course, shutting down the economy, that is something that I don't think that any of us would have ever envisioned taking place. And it was jarring, and we cannot ignore the implications for so many of Kentucky's families, because I can remember a time when I would get, 10 to 15 calls about unemployment a day because our unemployment system was not adequate, wasn't set up properly to take the influx. And I've lost count of the numbers, but at one point there were, I don't even want to say a number because I'm afraid it'll be wrong, but there were just so many folks that were struggling, out of work, weren't able to get assistance, and they weren't able to benefit from the pandemic unemployment assistance as well because they couldn't get through, and it was a mess. But back to the commentary that was made earlier about the Senate's resolution to end the state of emergency, I think that is high past time. In fact, they, meaning the legislature, has extended the state of emergency 3 times now. And I have voted not to extend the state of emergency. So it's definitely time. And I understand the argument about the federal dollars, but we've already received the ARPA funding and have a certain amount of time to spend it. And it's, well incorporated within the budget. So it's time to cut loose of those federal injections and get Kentuckians back to work. We have a 54% workforce participation rate among able-bodied adults. So it's time.
I'm wondering, I want to follow up on what you just referenced there, that the legislature has extended the state of emergency. And as we noted at the top of this, your party, the Republican Party, doesn't just have control, but dominates super majorities in both. So this is, there are Republicans who are voting to support that. And I'm curious about you. You're in your second term now, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
you've been down there for a couple of terms now, and you're seeking a third. And I'm wondering, where do you fit in the Republican caucus? Can you share with us on how your relationship is with the rest of the Republican Party in Frankfort?
I feel like I have a great relationship with my colleagues, and there are always robust discussions on policy issues because I am somewhat of an ideologue. I make no bones about that. But that said, I think that regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum, when you first arrive in Frankfort, you have an opportunity to encounter people from all walks of life and different experiences that have some different ideas than you do. And I think that I add a certain dimension to our caucus, just like everybody else. I think that I fit in well to the extent that I don't shy away from speaking my mind, and I am also willing to listen. And I think that that's the most important part, is being willing to listen.
We did see a pretty significant display of bipartisanship earlier this week, Mark Payne, right here in Covington at the Northern Kentucky Convention Center. And that's where Democratic Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and Republican Ohio Governor Mike DeWine appeared together, along with lawmakers and mayors and local officials of various stripes, to announce that they were signing a document apparently we're all familiar with already, but they were signing it again. And this time they mean it, that they're going hard after some federal dollars to get the Brent Spence Bridge project rolling again. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, so we have been here before, certainly, with other groups of politicians. This document is called the Memorandum of Understanding, and it is a document that essentially says that both states are going to work together to seek funding for the bridge. Both states are jointly seeking around $2 billion in funding for the project, and the funding, the majority of it, would come from the 2021 infrastructure bill that was passed on the federal level. And Mike DeWine said, "We believe this is one significant step forward to building a new bridge and improve the current bridge. I don't have to tell anybody in this room the importance of the bridge." It's certainly an important bridge. And I asked a lot of people this question, Michael. Back in 2015, or it might have been 2016, former Governor Steve Beshear and Ohio Governor Jim Kasich met, and they did something similar. The bridge back then had the potential to have tolls, which wasn't a popular option, but they kind of had this agreement as well. And so I framed that question to a couple of folks, what makes this time different? And I talked to Brent Kruper, the president of the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I talked to Joe Meyer, the mayor of Covington, and I talked to Senator Chris McDaniel, a Republican from Kenton County. And they all said, what makes this time different is that the money is actually there. If you remember back in January when Governor Andy Beshear proposed his budget, he also mentioned $250 million from the general fund. That's something that's never been offered from the state, to the best of my knowledge. But when Governor Mike DeWine from Ohio was kind of pressed about how much money they would offer up, he was a little vague on that number. But like I said, the majority of folks who seem much more knowledgeable about the issue than I do say it's as close as it's ever been, and it's likely to happen.
Senator McConnell sent a statement supporting the effort as well. Obviously, Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader in the U.S. Senate. We should note that Congressman Thomas Massey, a Republican, and our other Senator Rand Paul, also a Republican, did not vote for the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill that created the opportunity for this funding. We're joined today by State Representative Savannah Maddox, a Republican of Dry Ridge. I got to know Dry Ridge pretty well during my 2 years doing the morning news at WNKR for Grant County Broadcasters, and drove there every morning in the middle of the night to get ready for those newscasts. So I got to learn that stretch of 75. And my goodness, do you have a lot of dead deer in certain seasons on the side of that highway on the way down to Dry Ridge. But that's not the only problem. I mean, it is a major interstate highway that connects Michigan all the way down to Florida. And that's the emphasis that a lot of folks place when pushing to move forward on the Brent Spence corridor project, because it's not just about the bridge directly connecting Covington to Cincinnati as a major national artery. What were your thoughts on the announcement we saw this week?
Well, despite the fact that I don't have that portion of Kenton County, you couldn't have said it better. It's extremely important to so many folks in the Northern Kentucky region and, frankly, throughout the Commonwealth that we address that situation. And when you say $2 billion and you understand that 2.8 billion is what it is projected to cost to address this situation, it says, okay, 2 billion out of 2.8, but in all actuality, we're left with 800 million. And, between Ohio and between Kentucky, even if it were split right down the middle, 400 million. So it's still quite a consideration. And it's good that we now have the opportunity to address that in so much as we do have additional funding. But the most important thing about it to me is the lack of tolls, because that is just an absolute non-starter in Northern Kentucky. Definitely not in favor of tolls. So I'm very encouraged to hear that that's not even part of this discussion.
I want to share a question from a viewer on our Facebook page. Adam Fritsch wants to know whether state employees should have a cost of living increase this year. Representative Maddox.
I anticipate that they will in the budget in all likelihood, because we have been working feverishly to come up with our version of it. And then, of course, the Senate has theirs as well. We passed ours early on, but there's still tweaks that will take place in free conference committee. And I anticipate that there will in all likelihood be raises for state workers. And on the cost of living adjustment aspect of it, whether it's that, whether it's a raise, I think that we're going to end up having the flexibility to do some good things. But I am very hesitant to make specific promises until we see how that comes out of the process a little further down. And hopefully the Senate will begin their side of things. I know March was kind of when they were going to begin their side. So we tried to hit the ground running, but we've still got plenty of time.
Okay, two quick things before we let you run and you can get on with your evening. I want to let our viewers know that we will have a conversation about the Brent Spence Bridge on the other side of this, so stay tuned. That's coming up next here on the Frankfort Link Live. We talked about redistricting briefly. What are your thoughts on the new district? I guess you've got a lot less of Kenton County, a lot more of Boone County, and you are going to be introducing yourself to a new group of voters in Gallatin County while keeping all of Grant County. So your thoughts on that process and where your district landed?
I'm very pleased with the way that it turned out, in so much as there's quite a bit of dialogue and always has been in the Northern Kentucky counties. So Boone and Kenton, whether I have a little bit less or a little bit more of one, I've always worked in the context of with those county governments and with citizens. And Gallatin County is new, but it's not it's not very culturally different or disconnected in any way, shape, or form from the other county that I reside in and am from, Grant County. So I think that it's going to be good. And I am very pleased to continue to work with other members of the Northern Kentucky Caucus. I think we work well together and are able to have a pretty broad understanding of the different issues that each county presents.
We know you're running for re-election this year to represent that new 61st district, that newly drawn 61st district. When will we know whether you're running for governor next year?
I have been so humbled by the amount of support that I've received of folks encouraging me to run for governor. And I have loved serving in the General Assembly and having the opportunity, and certainly am paying attention and wouldn't rule anything along those lines out. But at this moment in time, I am focused on doing the job that I was currently elected to do and serving in the legislature. But I do think that we are well positioned in the Commonwealth to lead on the issues that matter to me and matter to the majority of Kentuckians in terms of advocating for conservative values. So I'm all in on doing whatever I can to build on that and keep up the momentum.
It sounds like you're considering entering that race.
That would be an accurate statement.
Okay. Do you have like a deadline on and I don't want to pressure you too much on that. I know that you guys in politics have ways of answering that type of question to buy some time from us journalists. But, you know, in Kentucky, you got to pick a running mate. You want to start fundraising because the primaries do come up in the spring. So when should we expect for you to move either beyond considering and determining yes or no?
Well, actually, now the gubernatorial slate has changed in so much as you don't have to pick a running mate prior to the primary. So that aspect of it's different. But, you know, we're going to try
when did
to
that
finish.
happen? How did I miss that?
I think maybe a year ago. I should know the exact year that it happened, but it has changed now. But right now I'm going to focus on finishing strong in 2022 and pray about things to come.
That is State Representative Savannah Maddox, a Republican from Dry Ridge, who just gave me a state civics lesson. So I appreciate that. And thank you for the time. I hope you'll come back on and talk to us again soon.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. You can just click leave on your side of Zoom. That's how we'll do things around here. And we'll talk to you later. You can see that Lee Crume from the Tri-County Economic Development Authority, also known as Triad, has now joined us. We're going to talk about infrastructure, the Brent Spence Bridge announcement, and other economic development issues in Northern Kentucky. First, let's give you a Link NKY NKU basketball update. Bad news out of Cleveland this evening. The Northern Kentucky women's basketball team has fallen as a 5th seed to 4th seeded Cleveland State, 59-51. So that ends the NKU women's basketball's conference tournament run. So we'll keep an eye out on which postseason tournament they end up in. With a 21-8 record right now, they're sure to play in some postseason tournament, but unfortunately it will not be the NCAA tournament. And we move to Highland Heights now, where the NKU men's basketball team is also in action in the Horizon League tournament as a 3 seed against the 6-seeded Detroit Titans. NKU is up 19-15 with 6 minutes to play in the half. And you are watching the Frankfort Link live from Link NKY. I'm Michael Monks, reporting from downtown Covington, joined by Link NKY politics and government reporter Mark Payne, who is reporting from Frankfort for the duration of the Kentucky General Assembly session. And as we noted, Lee Crume from Triad is now with us. Lee, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, glad to be here. Good to see you, Michael.
Well, I know that your organization helps lead economic development opportunities, expansions, business growth, and that sort of thing, site selection around the region. We'll talk a little bit about how well that's been going in spite of everything else that we've all been dealing with just as a species. But there was a big announcement this week related to the Brent Spence Bridge. Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat of Kentucky, and Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, a Republican, appeared together here in Covington at the Convention Center, along with lawmakers of both parties, local officials of both parties, to celebrate this announcement that they were going to pursue federal dollars made available through that infrastructure bill that was pushed by President Joe Biden and members of both parties in the Congress. And there's more optimism around this than ever before. What would this project mean in terms of economic development, do you think, Lee?
Well, it's a gigantic project that is incredibly important for the region. I'm sure all of the watchers know the importance of this bridge. We talk about the amount of GDP that crosses it every day, every year, the connectivity of I-75 from the tip of Michigan all the way to Florida, and the amount of traffic that transits it. You know, as you kind of move down that scale and you look locally and you think about its importance, we know how important that bridge is when it was out of service twice in the last year and a half, and how incredibly painful it was for our community. we tend to work with larger organizations that are making a national, international decision, but those are very local companies that are just depending on that access. I talked to Paul Verse Corporation and trying to get trucks across it to serve the local market, or the folks at Braxton who are trying to get their product across the river to service local markets. Was incredibly painful on their businesses while that thing was shut down. It's almost as though now that it's been open, we forget about that time. So, really long story short, it's an incredibly important project from the most micro level locally to a macro, national, and even North American perspective.
So we've had a lot of economic development announcements in spite of the pandemic. I think after the first 6 months, business started happening again. And of course, there was uncertainty, perhaps even lingering uncertainty. Global events are still troubling to look at, and the lingering impacts of the virus and the response to it and the inflation and that sort of thing are still causing some pessimism, but there is cause for celebration if you care about job creation in Northern Kentucky. There are a lot of jobs that have been announced in this region. Governor Beshear is always excited to make those types of announcements, as are the local lawmakers and local officials. Why are businesses coming here?
Yeah, we're a non-political organization. We serve all Northern Kentuckians, but we're always very happy to make the governor happy by coming here and making those announcements, or any of our mayors to make those announcements. You mentioned that, after about 6 months, the crazy thing for our business was the activity actually never slowed down. If you think back 1 year ago, really, 1 year almost 2 years ago, 2 weeks short of 2 years, we thought the world just came to a stop, and we went into, really disaster planning and all these dire, kind of ideas. And actually, we never had a stop in project volume coming in. We never had a stop in actually winning projects through COVID. And at first, we were kind of just stunned by that. We didn't know, you didn't know what was going on. It's been consistent like that through the pandemic. And who among us would have predicted that, we went into a recession and then almost immediately out of a recession back in that time. So it's just been incredible. So why are they choosing Northern Kentucky? Well, they're choosing Northern Kentucky today for the same reason they've always chosen Northern Kentucky. And that's because we have great underlying business attributes. We talk about the Brent Spence Bridge. Everybody knows its proximity and 60% of this much of the nation, or, within a day's drive of this much of the nation's population. So that attribute is still true. You look at like a Fidelity. That's true in a back office and serving the eastern half of the United States and Canada. So you see that advantage is still there. We have a great workforce. We have a great cost of living. We saw clients making a decision to move into offices during the pandemic because of the livability that we have in this community and their ability to walk and go to restaurants and feel safe, know that they could raise a family. I really think all of those things have come together. They've always been there, and they've been with us through this whole time.
I want to talk about tax incentives, Lee. And again, for those of you joining us, Lee Crume is with Triad, one of the local agencies that assists business growth in the region. Just about all of these announcements, maybe all of them, include some sort of subsidy at the state level and even occasionally at the local level. What does Northern Kentucky have to do to attract major investment without the promise of a government subsidy?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I don't love the word subsidy there. And the reason is the incentives that Kentucky provides are really their earned incentives. The company does not get a benefit until they do the activity that they commit to doing. Oftentimes that means they have to build a facility, employ people, pay taxes, and then they actually get a refund of some of the taxes that have been paid. So to me, it feels a little different than that. That's a fair question on incentives. From our world, we're always trying to make sure that we understand what's the true business drivers of this company, what is their need, and does Northern Kentucky have the right solution to that? We want to solve that problem first, and if we've got a good answer for that, then we're happy to talk about the incentive piece. The challenge is until there's a point where nobody has incentives, you're going to have to provide them. Maybe it's a fair conversation to say, what would it look like nationally to get rid of incentives? That's a federal conversation. I would hate to see Kentucky lay down that tool that they have today, or all the tools that they have today. before all of our competitors lay them down as well.
Yeah, there absolutely is this situation all across the country, and I never gave it much thought until I guess it was a little bit later in the Great Recession, 2011-ish, 2012, when Omnicare and AC Nielsen both departed Covington. It was a devastating blow for downtown Covington, and that Madison Place building remained completely vacant until just last year when it opened as an apartment building. And River Center was really hit hard, and that has recovered remarkably in the years since. But there was a moment where it was pretty scary in Covington when two of its largest employers lost, only to move a football field away in Cincinnati, lured away by better incentives. And so it's one thing to pit one state against another, but there are occasions even here in Northern Kentucky where a company might relocate from one city to another and receive those incentives that you were talking about. I'm wondering if there needs to be an exploration to help the community that loses the business make up any lost tax revenue, since the business is receiving an incentive to move not very far away.
Yeah, boy, you put a lot on the table there, and I want to try to give a short answer, but you got a number of things. I wasn't here back in the Omnicare day. I've heard that story, and so let's deal with that. We've worked with a number of companies that have made a site location decision. A great example is Protective Insurance. They moved a large part of their operations inside of the metro, from one part of the metro to another part of the metro. In this case, they ended up in River Center in Covington. And people always see that as a certain lens of intra-region competition. But what you lose track of is there's no guarantee that that company is going to stay in a marketplace. We are in a regional and national and sometimes a global competition. And and I say we, I mean, from Mason to the southern tip of Boone County, have to recognize that and fight like crazy to keep these companies in our region, first and foremost. And the point there being, there's no guarantee that a company like that is going to make a decision to stay here. Are there going to be some actors that play the incentive card? For sure, that's going to happen from time to time. But again, going back to my earlier comment, we try to get into the business decision that they're trying to make. Do we have the right business attributes? Do we have the right site for them? If we can answer those questions, then we're happy to talk about the incentive piece. The final part on that is there's nothing unique about that decision that happens here that doesn't happen in Columbus, that doesn't happen in Indianapolis, that doesn't happen in Nashville. The only thing that's different here is we have a river in the middle of our beautiful home here. And instead of it being one part of the community and another part of the community, and believe me, they get incentives in Columbus and they get incentives in Indianapolis and they get incentives in Nashville, but that river causes us to have this, real heartache over that equation. So, and the last thing I'll talk on that is you talked about the community that oftentimes sees that company moving out. Couple of things that we do as professional economic developers in this space, and I know Ready Cincinnati does the same thing, is first thing is we never proactively approach a company like that with the idea to move from one place to another. We don't do that. Second thing is when we are approached by a company that says we have a need to do something different, and it may take us out of our home space, we strongly encourage them to immediately start working with that local community, so the local community understands the business needs they have, the type of what decision they're going to make, so that community can do everything they can do to start preparing for that. That doesn't always happen. There are often reasons why the company can't share that information, but I think, when you look at the economic developer, those two things are real important for us.
That's Lee Crume from Triad. And we're also, of course, joined by Mark Payne, Lincoln KY politics and government reporter. We know that Governor Beshear loves to tout economic development, and he has had some very significant announcements over the past 18 months. Not all of them in our area, but a great deal of them in our area. I know that he was very excited about the Ford operation closer to Louisville, and there have been some other big announcements elsewhere, but huge announcements in Northern Kentucky. I think he said Northern Kentucky was on fire last time I talked to him. Share a bit with what you're seeing in Frankfort as it relates to economic development.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot.
I'm sorry, Lee. We'll come back to you in just a moment. It's okay. Yeah, no, we're going to get to you in we'll come back to you in just a minute. Let's bring in, I feel like I've ignored Mark and he's just sitting there. So
no, it's totally fine. Oh, no, you're totally fine, Lee. I actually, that's a lot of great info, and I have some questions for you. One thing that I really found interesting so far in the General Assembly is, when we talk about redistricting and kind of what has led to that, there's been these huge population shifts out of Western and Eastern Kentucky into the triangle or the big triangle, wherever you want to call it. So Lexington, Louisville, and Northern Kentucky. And of those three, Northern Kentucky is the fastest growing region. And then obviously there's some really important legislation that's going through right now that could have a huge impact on economic development in Northern Kentucky. Now, we can certainly talk about Governor Beshear's projects that he's mentioned in Northern Kentucky. The life sciences obviously is a huge thing in Covington. The $10 million that's been in capital investment that's been put aside for that project. But I'm interested to see how the income tax, as Republicans have, they passed House Bill 8 out of committee today, and they talked about, lowering and then getting rid of the income tax in Kentucky. You see it happen in other states that are doing really well financially, Texas being one of those. They don't have an income tax in Texas, but they have a really high sales tax. But Texas has known, a great example of that is Elon Musk moving his headquarters from California to Texas. I'm interested to see, if you wouldn't mind answering that, Lee, how do you see some of this legislation impacting the Northern Kentucky economic development?
Yeah, well, look, if I was Elon Musk and I was sitting on a few $1 billion, I'd be super duper interested in not paying income tax. That's a very different issue for him than it is for us. There's a lot going on in the legislative arena. For us locally, you've got two things that are really working. Both the governor and the House have talked about putting money into sites and making sure that we've got good, ready sites. If you think about this from a consumer world, when our client comes in the door, they need to have a product they can buy today. It's the same thing when if I walk down the street and I want to buy a car, I don't want to hear the dealer tell me, hey, no problem, we're going to get the parts and assemble this thing, and it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. We'll have a car out here in just a little bit. As a consumer, I would never buy that car. Our client's making the same decision on a site or a building. So getting that money out there to help us get those things prepared are incredibly important. So I love that legislation. And you see a lot of conversation on it. And then you also mentioned the life science lab that has been talked about in Covington, $10 million. Hugely important investment. And you asked the question, why is it important? Well, one, we have a really nice life sciences sector that's growing in the community today. You've got Gravity. Everybody knows what they've done the last 2 years. You got CTI sitting there that's also been a leader in the last 2 years. You got Bexion that's up and coming and a bunch of others. And you need these places where innovation can take place, where they talk about two scientists in a molecule, and they need to be able to noodle on that and build that thing. And that's what this life science center would be able to do for us. CTI could bring people in, Bexion could bring people in, and now they've got a home. So that's hugely important legislation. The House Bill 8 on the income tax, the thing I would tell you is when we're working with our clients, it's very rarely a question they're going to ask on the income tax side of the equation. Where it is important is how do we make our state look favorable so we can start driving that population number like this. And if moving more to a consumption-based tax system is a trigger for that, then that's a good thing.
Gotcha. You might have heard a little bit about this week. So there has been some numbers put out from the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce with the workforce participation rate being at 53%. The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy this week said that those numbers don't focus on prime age. So the numbers from the chamber also include workers over 16 all the way to 64. And obviously when you're driving through Northern Kentucky or a lot of cities, you do see a lot of signs for help wanted. Has the workforce participation rate had an impact on Northern Kentucky businesses?
It absolutely does. And so there's a lot of ways to slice that thing. Our workforce participation rate pre-COVID and today is bumping right up against 70%, which is close to full employment as you can possibly get. So it absolutely does. We talk a lot about where our company's going to get workforce, How are they going to manage that challenge? Getting them connected with the right resources is something that we spend a lot of time on. Here's the good news for us in that equation. They almost are never comparing us to a city or a location that doesn't have the same problem. And fortunately for our community, we do have favorable numbers, especially on that population growth and some of that in migration that helps allay those concerns. But when you look statewide and we think about how can we grow as a state and how we can be efficient as a state, we do have pockets of places where those numbers are not good, and we need, it's not my responsibility, but as a state and people that care about our brothers and sisters, we do need to find solutions. The lowest area of the state that I saw with that was under 30%. And so you think about that, less than 1 in 3 persons that could have a job has a job. That's got to be a tough go.
And Lee, before we wrap this thing up, I just want to note that one area that the pandemic really hit was travel. There wasn't a lot of flying, and there wasn't a lot of flying into CVG naturally, and there wasn't a lot of renting of cars. And the rental car tax is how Triad is funded here locally. It was a unique idea back when Triad was created, but you're still here. And I know you just launched a big capital campaign. So very briefly, that must have been very scary for an organization like yours that is so dependent on that revenue source to watch that basically vanish in an instant.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, not a tax. It's a fee. It's KRS 68.
Not a subsidy.
Right.
Not a tax. I see.
It's KRS 68.200 if you're keeping score. And it's a motor vehicle license fee. And so for those that don't know, it's a 3% fee on a motor vehicle car rented anywhere in Northern Kentucky. We often think of CVG, but it's anywhere in Northern Kentucky. It's one of those great vehicles that was created 30 years ago, because you think about who rents cars in the communities, it's often people who come and visit. So just like what Tennessee's doing with the high sales tax, or what Florida does with the high sales tax, they're allowing people that visit their community to help drive critical activities. It definitely took a dip. We forecasted our fiscal 2021 at 27% of historic numbers. That was a hard pill to swallow. Fortunately, it was like 45%. So we were like, wow, 45% never felt so good. I would tell you 2 things that were really critical there. One, my predecessor left us in outstanding financial shape. So we had reserves. The money that was made available, we used PPP and things like that, really helped carry us through. We worked with a ton of partners in the community that just, they said, hey, you don't have to pay that bill. Pay us when you get things going back. So we had a lot of community support. But to your question, through that process, as I said earlier, we kept having good activity. We kept landing deals, and we looked at what does this community need from an economic development perspective? We identified 4 things that we think would be helpful. We put those into a campaign called Build and Elevate Northern Kentucky. We have a great community. We want to build it and elevate it. And then we launched that as a $4.5 million campaign publicly a couple of weeks ago. Great news is we're already at about 65% of that goal, just over $3 million. And we hope to run that through the end of April and get it wrapped up, and then get to the work of implementing those 4 initiatives.
Lee Crume is the Chief Executive Officer of Triad, which helps lead economic development efforts across the Northern Kentucky region. Lee, I'm so grateful you spent some time with us today to talk about opportunities, challenges, and issues.
Yep, Michael, Mark, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
And Mark
Thanks,
Payne,
Lee.
Lincoln KY politics and government reporter, who is reporting from Frankfort for the duration of the General Assembly at lincolnky.com. Mark, thanks to you for being with us also.
Thanks as always, Michael. It's a great time.
And thanks to all of you watching the Frankfort Link live this evening on our Facebook page. Check out lincolnky.com for up-to-the-minute news reporting on Northern Kentucky. Sign up for the Daily Link and get your news in your email and watch it with your cup of coffee in the morning. Also find the Kentucky Side podcast and our podcast section there. Hope you enjoyed the link reader, which should have been in your mailbox by now as well. I'm Michael Monks reporting live from downtown Covington. Thanks for being with us this evening.